The clock struck midnight in the cold, dimly lit study. Sir Julian Ashford, master clockmaker, renowned for his precision, was found dead at his desk, his eyes wide open in shock, and the clock in his hand frozen. But there was no sign of struggle, no trace of an intruder, only the eerie ticking of the clocks that filled the air, all except one, the clock that had stopped just before midnight, and with it, the mystery of his death. What secret was locked inside that clock? Who in the house was hiding the truth? Stay with us as we uncover the final pieces of the puzzle. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to solve the mystery together. Chapter 1. The Tick of the Clock. The gentle hum of the countryside was shattered only by the occasional creak of the old estate, nestled amongst the sprawling trees of the Ashford family property. It was a picturesque scene, the very essence of tranquil English beauty. But for Hercule Poirot, there was no such thing as true peace when a mystery was afoot. He had arrived at Ashford Manor on a warm spring morning, summoned by Sir Julian Ashford, a famed clockmaker and an old friend of Poirot's. The invitation had been polite, but there was an undertone in Sir Julian's words that piqued Poirot's interest. "A matter of some urgency," Sir Julian had written. "Something that troubles me deeply." Poirot had taken the train from London, the rhythmic clattering of the tracks a soothing companion to his thoughtful reflections. He had wondered what could possibly disturb a man so dedicated to the craft of horology. Sir Julian, a man of precision and order, was not one to be easily shaken. Upon his arrival at the manor, Poirot was greeted by the butler, an elderly man named Mr. Fielding, who led him through the grand halls adorned with ornate clocks of all shapes and sizes. The ticking of countless timepieces filled the air, a constant reminder of the place's purpose, the mastery of time. Poirot was shown to the study, where Sir Julian was typically found when working on his latest creations. The room was filled with the smell of polished wood and brass. The walls were lined with shelves, each housing clocks of varying styles, some ancient, others newly crafted. There, amidst the ticking, stood Sir Julian, his back turned as he was hunched over his desk. Poirot's keen eyes immediately caught sight of something that didn't fit. Sir Julian's typically immaculate workspace was in disarray, the desk littered with half-finished projects and papers. "Ah, mon ami!" Sir Julian greeted, turning with a strained smile. His face was drawn pale, and his usually tidy white shirt was rumpled. "Forgive me for the disorder, but I have been preoccupied." Poirot offered a warm smile but remained silent, studying Sir Julian's face with a practiced eye. Something was amiss. Sir Julian's hands shook as he reached for a nearby clock on the desk. Poirot noticed that this particular clock was special. It was one of Sir Julian's own designs, a beautiful piece that had taken him months to complete. "I fear time is not on my side," Sir Julian murmured, his eyes distant. Before Poirot could inquire further, the butler returned with a tray of tea. Sir Julian gestured for Poirot to sit, his hands still trembling as he poured the tea. As Poirot sipped, Sir Julian explained that he had been hearing strange noises in the house at night. A ticking that wasn't the sound of any of his clocks. It was an unsettling, almost rhythmic sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Time is playing tricks on me, Poirot," Sir Julian admitted, with a note of fear in his voice. "I have become obsessed with this idea that one of my clocks is different. It has something to say to me. I am certain." Poirot listened carefully, his mind already turning over the possibilities. The conversation continued for a while longer, Sir Julian speaking about his work and his worries. Poirot, ever attentive, made mental notes of the details. Sir Julian's obsession with time, his reluctance to show Poirot the troubled clock, his unease with the ticking. There was more to this than mere paranoia. Sir Julian was a man of reason and precision. Something had truly disturbed him. The clockmaker then fell silent, his gaze fixed on the clock before him. Poirot's gaze followed, noticing something peculiar. A small, delicate clock on the edge of the desk, its hands frozen at precisely midnight. Poirot could not help but feel an odd shiver crawl up his spine. It was as if this clock had stopped time itself, holding some secret that it refused to reveal. Sir Julian noticed Poirot's interest, and his face grew pale once more. "That one," Sir Julian whispered, "was the last clock I worked on. But it's no ordinary piece. It holds something I cannot quite explain." At that moment, as if on cue, the grandfather clock in the corner struck the hour. The eerie sound echoed through the room like a ghostly reminder that time was slipping away. Poirot leaned in, his voice quiet but firm. "Mon ami, you must tell me more about this clock. What has troubled you?" Before Sir Julian could respond, there was a sudden noise, a sharp, hollow thud from the hallway. Poirot's head snapped toward the sound, his instincts immediately alert. The noise was followed by the muffled footsteps of someone running down the corridor. Mr. Fielding entered, his face ashen. "Sir Julian, I regret to inform you that—" He trailed off, glancing nervously at Poirot. Sir Julian stood abruptly, his face ashen. "What is it, Fielding?" The butler swallowed hard, his voice trembling. Sir Julian is dead." The words hit like a thunderclap. Poirot rose to his feet, the shock barely registering as he turned toward the butler. "What do you mean? Sir Julian is not—" But as they hurried to the hallway, Poirot's mind raced, connecting the dots at lightning speed. The frozen clock, the mysterious ticking sounds, the urgency in Sir Julian's voice. Something was terribly wrong, and Poirot knew in that moment that the game had begun. The study was empty, save for the scattered papers and broken clocks. Sir Julian Ashford was found in his chair, lifeless, his eyes staring blankly at the same clock he had claimed to be obsessed with. The room was eerily silent, save for the ticking of the many clocks, each seemingly marking the passage of time that now meant nothing. Poirot stood in the doorway, surveying the scene with a calm that was almost unsettling. His mind was already piecing together the puzzle. The frozen clock, the strange sounds, the cryptic remarks from Sir Julian, it all pointed to one thing: murder. As Poirot gazed at the lifeless form of his friend, he whispered to himself, "Mon ami, your secrets are now mine to unravel, and I will solve this mystery, no matter how long it takes." With a final glance at the stopped clock, Poirot turned to Mr. Fielding and the rest of the household, his eyes narrowing with resolve. "Do not move. The investigation begins now." The suspense of Sir Julian's untimely death, the eerie silence in the study, and the chilling presence of the frozen clock create a perfect atmosphere for Poirot's investigation to unfold. With each tick of the clock, the story progresses, building tension while maintaining a steady pace toward the unfolding mystery. Chapter 2. The Family of Secrets. The air in Ashford Manor grew heavier, as if the very walls had absorbed the tension that had only grown since Sir Julian's untimely death. Poirot, Ever the calm and composed figure made his way through the house with a quiet, deliberate grace, his mind already working through the many mysteries that lay before him. The clocks, now strangely silent in the wake of their master's passing, seemed to mourn with a soft, muted ticking. Poirot was shown into the drawing room where the family had gathered, their expressions as stiff and uncomfortable as the heavy velvet curtains that hung at the windows. The sudden death of Sir Julian had cast a long shadow over the once serene estate. Eleanor, the widow, sat in a chair by the fire, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red from crying, or perhaps, Poirot suspected, from the effort of not crying at all. Her beauty, though undeniable, was shrouded in an air of cold detachment. She was a woman who kept her emotions tightly bound, as if afraid that any loose thread would unravel the composure she so meticulously crafted. Beside her sat her daughter, Clarissa, a striking young woman with auburn hair, dressed in black, but with an air of discontent that was almost palpable. Her eyes, bright but weary, darted nervously around the room, never resting on one person for long. Poirot could sense that her mind was far from the present, lost in some faraway thought or memory, perhaps connected to the days before her father's death. The last member of the household, James, the young apprentice, stood by the window, his posture rigid and tense. His eyes were fixed on the outside world, but his nervous energy was unmistakable. James was a handsome young man, but there was a certain unease about him, something that did not sit right in Poirot's mind. Was it the anxiety in his shoulders, or the way his hand fidgeted with the collar of his shirt? Poirot could not be sure yet, but he knew there was more to this young man than met the eye. Poirot, ever the observer, took a seat across from the family, his eyes flicking between each of them. His voice when he spoke was measured and calm, as though he were speaking to old friends rather than suspects. Madame Ashford, Mademoiselle Clarissa, Monsieur James, Poirot began, his tone as soothing as a gentle river. I understand that this is a moment of great distress, but I must ask you to assist me in my inquiries. The death of your husband, your father, it is most troubling. There are things that must be explained. Eleanor's lips tightened, but she nodded slightly. We are all at a loss, Monsieur Poirot. My husband's death has been a great shock to us all. We cannot fathom how it could have happened. Clarissa, however, seemed far less composed. Her eyes flickered to the door, and her foot tapped nervously against the floor. Poirot watched her closely, sensing that there was a storm beneath her calm exterior. I don't see how I can be of any help, Clarissa said, her voice quivering slightly. I was upstairs in my room when it happened. I didn't hear anything unusual. The only thing I noticed was that Father had been acting strangely the past few days. Strangely how, mademoiselle? Poirot asked, his voice soft but insistent. Clarissa hesitated for a moment, her fingers twisting around a lace handkerchief in her lap. He had become obsessed with one of his clocks, she said quietly, as if speaking of something too private, too personal to reveal. He would stay up late, working on it, making sure it was perfect. He said it held some secret, but I don't understand what he meant. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze intense. And what was this clock, mademoiselle? The one that held the secret? Clarissa looked away, her expression shifting. I don't know, she whispered, but it was the last one he worked on, the one he was most proud of. And now, it's gone. Eleanor stiffened at the mention of the clock, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly. "We are not concerned with that now, Clarissa. There are more pressing matters to discuss." She turned to Poirot with an expression that was both cold and weary. "I'm sure you understand, Monsieur Poirot, that the clock is of no consequence. My husband's death, it was not murder. I am certain of it." Poirot said nothing at first. His eyes shifted from Eleanor to Clarissa, and then to James, who had remained silent until now. "Monsieur James," Poirot said, turning his attention to the young apprentice, "what can you tell me about the events of last night? You were in the house, were you not?" James straightened at the sound of his name, his eyes darting briefly to Clarissa before meeting Poirot's gaze. "Yes, I was in the house," he said, his voice tight. "But I was working in the workshop, far from the study. I heard nothing unusual." Poirot studied him, sensing the unspoken tension between James and the others. "And did you know of Sir Julian's obsession with the clock?" he asked carefully. James hesitated for a moment before answering. "Sir Julian was a man of passion when it came to his work," he said, his words measured. "But I never heard him speak of anything strange. He was just focused. That's all." Poirot's sharp mind was already piecing together fragments of the conversation. Sir Julian's obsession with the clock, the strange behavior of his family, and the mystery of the missing timepiece all pointed to something far deeper than an unfortunate accident. As he sat back in his chair, Poirot's gaze swept over the family, each of them holding their own secrets, their own fears. He could feel the weight of their silence, the air thick with unspoken words. In that moment, he knew that none of them were as innocent as they seemed. He spoke softly, but his words carried the weight of certainty. "There's something you are not telling me, all of you. The truth is hidden beneath the surface of this house, like the ticking of a clock that cannot be silenced. I will find it, mes amis. I will find the truth, no matter where it lies." As Poirot rose from his seat, the family remained still, their faces masks of restrained emotion. The tension in the room was palpable, and Poirot could not help but feel that he had only just begun to scratch the surface of a far darker mystery than he had first imagined. The clock was ticking once more, and the investigation was far from over. Chapter 3. The Missing Clock. The quiet of Ashford Manor had never been so pronounced. The clocks, which once ticked with the precision of a well-oiled machine, now seemed to whisper in hushed tones, as if afraid to disturb the uneasy silence that had settled over the estate. Poirot sat by the fireplace in the drawing room, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his mind turning over the events of the past few days. He had questioned the family thoroughly, and yet every answer seemed like a mere piece of a larger, more complicated puzzle. He knew there was more beneath the surface, something elusive, something that would unlock the mystery of Sir Julian's death. But what? The missing clock? He could not forget that. It had haunted his thoughts since Clarissa's nervous mention of it in their previous conversation. The clock her father had been so obsessed with, the clock that held some sort of secret, was now gone. And with its disappearance came an unsettling sense of dread, as if the very fabric of time itself had been unraveled. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by the soft creak of the door. Mr. Fielding, the butler, entered the room with his usual air of quiet professionalism, though there was a nervous tension about him. He carried a letter in his hand, his eyes avoiding Poirot's as he placed the envelope on the table in front of the detective. "Forgive me for disturbing you, Monsieur Poirot," Fielding said, his voice strained. "But this arrived this morning. It is for you." Poirot took the envelope with a calm, measured motion. The letter was plain, its handwriting sharp and deliberate, the ink still fresh. He opened it carefully, his eyes scanning the brief message. "The clock is not just a clock. It must be found before it's too late. The truth lies within it." Poirot folded the letter with a thoughtful frown, his mind already racing through the implications. The message was cryptic, its meaning unclear, but it confirmed what he had suspected all along. The missing clock was central to the mystery. "Fielding," Poirot said, his voice gentle but commanding. "Where's the clock? The one that Sir Julian was so preoccupied with?" The butler hesitated, glancing nervously at the floor. I don't know, Monsieur Poirot. It was last seen in Sir Julian's study, but now it is gone." Poirot rose to his feet, his movements fluid and deliberate. "The study, then. Let us begin there." The study was as Poirot had left it, cluttered, disordered, but eerily still. The familiar ticking of clocks that filled the house was absent here, replaced by an unsettling silence. Poirot approached the desk, his sharp eyes scanning the room for any clue that might have been overlooked. He noted the faint marks on the desk where the missing clock had once rested, but there was no sign of forced entry, no signs of a struggle. It was as though the clock had simply disappeared into thin air. "Fielding," Poirot said, turning toward the butler. "Did anyone enter this room after Sir Julian's death?" Fielding shook his head, his face drawn with worry. "No one, Monsieur Poirot. I ensured the room was undisturbed. But it is possible that Mademoiselle Clarissa or Monsieur James might have..." Poirot's brow furrowed as he turned back to the desk. "And yet, no one has seen this clock since Sir Julian's passing. It is most curious." He ran his fingers lightly over the wood of the desk, his eyes sharp, searching for anything out of place. His fingers paused on a small drawer at the edge, one that was slightly ajar. With a quiet motion, he slid the drawer open. Inside, there was a small folded piece of paper. Poirot unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the hastily written words. "I know you are watching. I know you are listening. The clock holds the key. Do not trust them." The message was chilling, the handwriting unmistakably frantic. But what did it mean? Who had written it? And why had it been hidden in this drawer? Poirot placed the paper aside, his mind already racing through the possibilities. The clock was indeed the key, that much was clear. But to what? "Fielding," Poirot said, turning back to the butler with a sense of quiet urgency. "Has anyone else been in this room since Sir Julian's death?" Fielding hesitated, then spoke with uncertainty. "I believe Mademoiselle Clarissa came in to collect some of her father's personal items, but that was after the body was removed." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Clarissa, again. The young woman who had spoken so nervously of the missing clock. Could she be hiding something? Or was there more to this than mere obsession? He took a deep breath, trying to piece the fragments together. The clock was missing, but the message was clear. The clock held something far more important than mere time. But what was it? And why did Sir Julian's family seem so intent on keeping it hidden? "Fielding," Poirot said softly, his eyes never leaving the room. "I will need to speak with Mademoiselle Clarissa and Monsieur James again. It seems there is more to this story than I first suspected." The investigation continued that afternoon, with Poirot speaking to Clarissa in the drawing room, her earlier nervousness now replaced with a cool, almost aloof demeanor. She spoke of her father's obsession with the clock, her eyes averted as she described the days leading up to his death. "I don't know where it is," she said, her voice flat. "It was just another one of his eccentricities. I didn't think much of it." Poirot's eyes lingered on her face, his gaze calculating. There was something in her expression, something behind her words that didn't ring true. She was hiding something. But what? Why would she lie about the clock? Then there was James, the young apprentice, whose quiet demeanor masked an inner tension that Poirot could feel in every word he spoke. "I've told you everything, Monsieur Poirot," James said, his voice tight. "I didn't know about the clock. I was in the workshop when it happened. I had no reason to be in the study." Poirot's mind ticked over his words, the contradictions beginning to pile up. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The clock was the key. He was certain of it. But what was the secret it held? As Poirot sat back in his chair, the mystery deepened, and with it, his resolve. The clock had been stolen, its secrets hidden away by someone in this very house. And Poirot would find it, no matter the cost. The clock was ticking once more. Chapter 4. A Delicate Web of Lies. The evening sky outside Ashford Manor was heavy with the weight of an approaching storm. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, casting long shadows over the grand estate. Inside, the air felt thick, almost suffocating, as Hercule Poirot sat in the drawing room, reflecting on the fragments of the mystery that had begun to take shape. But like the ticking of the clocks that had once filled the house, the pieces of this puzzle were moving too swiftly to be fully grasped. The family was gathered once more, this time in a more tense, deliberate manner. The house, once bustling with activity, now seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when the truth would emerge from behind the shadows. Poirot was determined to unveil that truth, no matter how intricate the web of lies had become. The room was dimly lit by a few flickering candles, their flames dancing in the drafts that seemed to have taken up residence in the house. Eleanor sat by the fire, her figure cloaked in the warmth of the hearth, her face obscured by the flickering shadows. Her usual stoic composure had faltered since Sir Julian's death, yet her expression still carried the cold reserve of a woman who knew how to maintain control. Beside her, Clarissa sat stiffly, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes darting nervously from Poirot to the floor, never quite meeting his gaze. James, the apprentice, stood near the window once more, his posture rigid, his hands clenched by his sides. He had been mostly silent, his presence more of a quiet tension than anything else. It was as though he too was waiting for the inevitable question, the moment when Poirot would confront him with the truth. Poirot, ever the observant one, did not break the silence immediately. He studied them, each of them, like a fine painting, analyzing every nuance, every unspoken emotion that hung in the air. The tension between them was palpable, thickening with every passing moment. At last, Poirot spoke, his voice soft but steady, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "Mademoiselle Clarissa, Madame Ashford, Monsieur James," he began, "there is something I must ask you. Sir Julian's death, though tragic, was not a simple accident. No, there is more to the story than meets the eye. But more troubling than that, I sense. I sense that none of you are being entirely truthful with me." Eleanor's eyes flicked to him briefly, but she said nothing. Clarissa's hands tightened in her lap, her knuckles pale, and James shifted uncomfortably by the window, his gaze fixed firmly outside. The storm had not yet arrived, but its presence was felt in the strained air of the room. Poirot continued, his gaze never leaving the family, as though he were peeling away the layers of their carefully crafted facades. "Let us begin with you, Madame Ashford," Poirot said, turning his attention to the widow. "You claim that you were unaware of your husband's obsession with the clock. Yet when I asked about the missing clock, your reaction was peculiar. You avoided the subject with a sense of urgency, as though there were something you wished to conceal, a certain knowledge you do not wish to share." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line, but Poirot could see the flicker of discomfort in her eyes. "I have already told you, Monsieur Poirot, that my husband's obsessions were his own," she said, her voice calm but strained. "I did not involve myself in his work, and I certainly did not concern myself with his clocks." "Ah," Poirot replied gently, "but you did concern yourself with something, did you not, Madame Ashford? The letter you received not long ago, the one you so carefully tucked away from the eyes of others. A letter that spoke of threats, perhaps, threats to your husband and to you." The room grew colder at the mention of the letter. Clarissa's eyes widened slightly, and James shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor's face turned pale, but she quickly regained her composure, lifting her chin with defiance. "That letter," Eleanor began, her voice tinged with anger, "was nothing more than a foolish warning from a jealous admirer. Sir Julian had many such letters, many trivial threats from people who wanted his secrets. It was nothing to be concerned about." Poirot, however, was not convinced. He knew a lie when he heard one, and Eleanor's words, though spoken with confidence, rang hollow. There was more to this letter, more to Sir Julian's life than she was willing to admit. Poirot had learned long ago that it was in the smallest details that the greatest truths were often hidden. "Mademoiselle Clarissa," Poirot said, turning his attention to the young woman, "you spoke of your father's obsession with the clock, and yet you also told me that you did not know where it was. I ask you now, is this the truth? Did you not, in fact, know more about the clock's disappearance than you let on?" Clarissa flinched, her eyes darting nervously toward her mother before returning to Poirot. I don't know where it is, Monsieur Poirot," she stammered. "I told you the truth. I didn't know about any plot to steal it, if that's what you're suggesting." Poirot's gaze hardened. "And yet, mademoiselle, you were seen in the study, the very night before your father's death. You told me you were upstairs, but others have said differently. How do you explain this inconsistency?" Clarissa opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. The guilt was evident in the way she fidgeted in her seat, the way her breath quickened. Poirot could see it now. Clarissa was hiding something. Perhaps not the whole truth, but something important, something connected to the missing clock. Finally, Poirot turned to James, his expression calm but expectant. "Monsieur James," he said, his voice a steady cadence. "You were Sir Julian's apprentice, yes? You would have known about his work, his designs, his obsessions. Yet you too claim ignorance about the clock. And yet, it was you, Monsieur James, who was in the workshop that night, alone, and you were the one who found Sir Julian's body. Was it not you who alerted the household?" James stiffened, his shoulders rigid, his jaw clenched. "I did what anyone would have done," he said, his voice tight. "I found him, and I called for help." There was nothing more to it. Poirot studied him carefully, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "And yet, Monsieur James, there is something in your manner that speaks otherwise. What is it that you are not telling me? Why do I feel that you are concealing more than a simple accident?" The young apprentice shifted uncomfortably. I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Poirot's eyes were sharp as he observed him. The young man was clearly hiding something. There was fear in his movements, a nervousness that betrayed his calm words. What was he afraid of? And why did he seem so hesitant to speak the truth? The detective sat back, his fingers gently tapping against his lips as he reflected on the revelations of the evening. The family was clearly tangled in a web of lies, each one more delicate and intricate than the last. Eleanor, Clarissa, and James each held a piece of the puzzle, but they were determined to keep their secrets hidden. The truth was out there. He could feel it, just beyond reach. "I see," Poirot said softly, his voice carrying the weight of his thoughts. "You have all played your parts in this delicate web of lies. But rest assured, mes amis, no secret is safe from the truth. I will uncover it, no matter how deeply it is buried." The room fell silent once more, the only sound the soft crackling of the fire as Poirot rose to his feet, his mind already racing toward the next step of the investigation. The storm outside had arrived, its winds howling through the trees, but Poirot felt no fear, for he knew that the truth was like the calm after the storm, inevitable, cleansing, and as soothing as it was certain. Chapter 5. The Apprentice's Secret. The storm outside Ashford Manor had finally made its full entrance, with rain battering the windows and wind howling through the trees, as though the very elements conspired to match the turmoil within the estate. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows over the drawing room, adding to the oppressive atmosphere that had settled since Sir Julian's death. Inside, Hercule Poirot sat as still as the ticking clocks that had once filled the manor, his mind working in the same deliberate, meticulous manner that he had used for years. The mystery of Sir Julian Ashford's death had unfolded in layers, each revelation leading to a deeper, more unsettling truth. But there was still something missing. Something in the eyes of the Ashford family, something that lurked in their silence. Poirot knew that there was one more thread to pull, one more person whose secrets had yet to be fully revealed. The young apprentice, James, had remained an enigma from the start. His quiet demeanor, his rigid posture, everything about him suggested that there was more beneath the surface, something he was desperately trying to keep hidden. That evening, Poirot had invited James to meet him in the study, the room where Sir Julian had passed away. The storm outside continued to rage as if nature itself understood the gravity of the situation. Poirot waited in the study, his back straight and his eyes calm. James was due to arrive shortly, and Poirot's mind was already at work, piecing together the fragments of the young man's story. When James finally entered the room, he seemed even more tense than usual. His eyes darted nervously around the study, as though the room itself might betray him. Poirot, ever the patient one, waited in silence, allowing the young man to settle. "Please, Monsieur James," Poirot said, his voice gentle yet firm. "Sit. We have much to discuss." James hesitated for a moment before lowering himself into the chair opposite Poirot. His hands fidgeted with the edge of his coat, his gaze flickering to the corners of the room. Poirot did not rush him. Instead, he allowed the silence to grow, knowing that it would eventually compel James to speak. At last, the young man looked up, his eyes wide with a mix of anxiety and something else, something darker, deeper. "Monsieur Poirot," James began, his voice tight and strained, "I've told you everything I know. I don't know anything more about my master's death. I found him in the study, and I called for help. That's all." Poirot studied him carefully, his gaze unwavering. "Ah, but that is where you are mistaken, Monsieur James," he said softly. "You are hiding something. There is more to your story, n'est-ce pas? Why did you lie about not knowing the missing clock?" James stiffened at the accusation, his face paling slightly. "I told you, I didn't know anything about it. I never saw it before. Why would I lie about something like that?" Poirot's voice remained soothing, but there was a firmness to it now that cut through the young man's defenses like a surgeon's scalpel. "You see, Monsieur James, I do not believe you. You were an apprentice to Sir Julian. You worked with him day in and day out for years. You would have known about his obsession with the clock. You would have known how important it was to him. So why the lie? Why conceal something so seemingly trivial?" The storm outside raged louder, the wind now howling through the trees as if urging James to speak. The young man's hands trembled as he clasped them tightly together, his eyes now wide with fear. I didn't want to get involved," James confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was afraid. I didn't want to be caught in something bigger than me. I didn't know who to trust." Poirot leaned forward slightly, his expression still calm, but his eyes were piercing now, cutting through the layers of James's lies like a blade through cloth. "You were afraid of what, Monsieur James?" Poirot asked softly. "What was so dangerous about your involvement with the clock? What secret were you hiding?" James's breath quickened, and for a moment, it seemed as if he might crumble under the weight of Poirot's gaze. But then, with a sudden, almost imperceptible shift, he broke. He lowered his head, as if ashamed, and the words came out in a rush. "It wasn't just the clock," James said, his voice trembling. "It was what was inside it. My master, Sir Julian, had discovered something in the clock, something he believed would make him wealthy. But it wasn't just money. It was something more, a secret, something that had been passed down for generations. He became obsessed with it, and I didn't want to be part of it. I was afraid of what might happen if people found out about it." Poirot's brow furrowed as he absorbed the gravity of the confession. A secret inside the clock? Something that could lead to wealth, or worse? "Why didn't you tell anyone, Monsieur James?" Poirot pressed gently. "Why did you keep this secret?" James swallowed hard, his hands trembling in his lap. "I was afraid. Sir Julian had become erratic. He was obsessed. He kept talking about how he could unlock the secrets of the clock, and that it would make him rich beyond his wildest dreams. But I didn't trust him. He was becoming dangerous. He started making plans. I overheard him speaking to someone, but I didn't know who. All I knew was that it was about the clock. And then I found out that he'd been hiding it. The real secret. He'd been hiding it in plain sight, right there in the workshop. That's when I knew something was terribly wrong. Poirot remained still, his mind racing. A secret hidden within the clock. Something more than just a timepiece. Sir Julian's obsession had gone beyond mere craftsmanship. What was this secret? And why had Sir Julian's obsession with it led him to such a tragic end? "You were right to be afraid, Monsieur James," Poirot said softly, his voice taking on a more comforting tone now. "But hiding the truth will not help you. It will only lead to more danger. You must tell me everything about the secret, about who your master spoke to, about who might have wanted the clock for themselves." James's face paled further, and for a long moment he said nothing. But then, as if a dam had broken, he whispered the words that Poirot had been waiting for. "I overheard him talking to someone. A woman. She was interested in the clock, and Sir Julian promised her that he would unlock its secrets. I don't know who she was, but I think she wanted it more than he did. And when I realized what he was doing, I wanted to leave. But then I found him dead, and I didn't know what to do." Poirot's heart quickened, but his expression remained composed. A woman? Sir Julian had been speaking to a woman about the clock, a woman who wanted it badly enough to make deals. "And where is the clock now, Monsieur James?" Poirot asked gently, though the tension in his voice was unmistakable. "What did you do with it?" James's eyes flickered nervously. "I don't know where it is now. I never touched it. I couldn't. I was too scared." Poirot studied the young man for a moment longer before standing up. His movements were calm, soothing, but there was no mistaking the sharpness in his gaze. The investigation was far from over, and the clock, its secret, was still elusive. "Thank you, Monsieur James," Poirot said softly. "You have been helpful, but you are not free of suspicion yet. The truth still lies within the clock, and I will find it." With those words, Poirot turned and left the study, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but Poirot's mind was already racing. The apprentice had revealed much, but there was still more to uncover, and Poirot knew that the clock was at the heart of it all. Chapter 6. The clock's final secret. The rain continued to pour relentlessly over Ashford Manor, the thunder now rumbling in the distance as if nature itself were aligning with the deepening tension inside the house. Poirot sat at the edge of the drawing room, his mind turning over the fragments of the mystery that had thus far unraveled. The disappearance of Sir Julian's clock, the cryptic messages, the secrets hidden within the walls of the estate, all of it now led back to one undeniable truth. There was something within that clock that held the key to the murder. The question was not if it would be found, but where and how. The storm outside seemed a fitting backdrop for the mystery that had only grown more complicated with each passing day. The atmosphere within the manor felt thick with suspicion and dread, and Poirot could almost feel the presence of the unspoken secrets weighing heavily on the inhabitants of the house. He had spent hours with the family, piecing together their stories and slowly unraveling their lies. Clarissa's nervous glances, Eleanor's carefully measured calm, and James's tortured confession all pointed towards something more than a mere obsession with time. There was something darker at play, and it had all been linked to Sir Julian's final obsession, the clock. It was late into the evening when Poirot decided to return to the workshop, the very place where Sir Julian had spent most of his time in his final days. It was there that the mystery of the clock's secret might be hidden, and Poirot knew that it was time to confront whatever truths lay dormant in that room. The workshop was cold and dark when Poirot arrived, the scent of dust and oil heavy in the air. The walls were lined with clocks of all shapes and sizes, but it was the table in the center of the room that drew Poirot's attention. There, in the midst of the disarray, lay the remnants of Sir Julian's final project, a broken clock, its gears scattered about as though in a fit of frustration. It was a work of art, no doubt, but it was also something else. It was the clock that held the answers Poirot had been seeking. Poirot's keen eyes immediately picked up on something odd. A small compartment hidden beneath the clock's intricate design. A compartment that had been opened recently. As Poirot examined it closer, his fingers brushed against a tiny lever that seemed out of place. With a soft click, the hidden compartment sprang open, revealing a small metal key, tarnished by age, but unmistakably important. Poirot held the key up to the light, his brow furrowing in concentration. It was no ordinary key. It was small and delicate, yet its design was unlike anything he had seen before. It was clearly crafted with great care, and it seemed to fit perfectly with the enigmatic nature of the clock. "Ah," Poirot murmured to himself, "so this is the heart of the mystery." He turned the key over in his hands, studying it for a long moment. This was no mere artifact. It was a key to something much more significant. But what? What had Sir Julian been trying to unlock? Just as Poirot was lost in thought, a sound from behind him broke the silence. He turned swiftly to find Clarissa standing in the doorway, her face pale, her expression tense. Her hands gripped the doorframe tightly, her knuckles white against the dark wood. "Poirot," she said, her voice shaky but determined. "I need to speak with you. There's something you need to know." Poirot's eyes softened with understanding. The young woman was clearly on the edge, and yet there was something in her voice, something urgent, that made him pause. He gestured toward a chair nearby. "Please, Mademoiselle Clarissa, sit. What is it you wish to tell me?" Clarissa hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking nervously to the clock and then back to Poirot. She closed the door behind her, taking a step into the room. Her shoulders were tight, her posture rigid. Poirot could see that she was struggling to find the words, but he did not rush her. He had learned long ago that the truth would come in its own time. I know about the clock," Clarissa finally whispered. Her voice trembled with emotion, but there was a sense of resolve in her eyes now, something that had been missing before. "I know what my father was trying to do. He was not just after wealth. There was something far more dangerous in that clock, something that could destroy us all." Poirot's expression remained calm, his mind racing as he listened intently. "Go on, mademoiselle," he urged gently. "Tell me what you know." Clarissa took a deep breath, steadying herself. "My father had discovered a secret, a family secret. The clock, it wasn't just a clock. It was a key to something far older, something that had been hidden for generations. The key you found," she gestured toward the small metal key Poirot still held, "is the key to unlocking a vault that was sealed long ago. A vault that contains—" She paused, swallowing hard. "That contains the family's true legacy." Poirot's brow furrowed as he processed her words. "A vault? A hidden legacy? It was clear that Sir Julian had been more than just a clockmaker. He had been the keeper of a secret that had been buried deep within his family's history. But why had he chosen to reveal it now? And why had it led to his death? You must understand, Clarissa continued, her voice growing more desperate. The vault is not just full of gold or jewels. It contains something far more dangerous. Documents, letters, maps, evidence of crimes that were committed long ago. Things that, if revealed, could ruin everything. Poirot's mind raced. A legacy of crime? What could this mean? What had Sir Julian uncovered, and who was willing to kill to keep it hidden? You say that your father was becoming obsessed with this, Poirot said softly. Was he planning to reveal these secrets? Clarissa shook her head quickly. No, he was afraid. He was terrified of what he had found, but he couldn't stop. He thought that unlocking the vault could change everything, that he could rewrite history. But that's what killed him, Monsieur Poirot. Someone knew he had the key, and they were willing to kill to get it. Poirot's gaze softened as he studied her face. She had revealed something crucial, something that illuminated the shadow of death that had fallen over Sir Julian. But there was more to the story. There was always more. Who else knew of the clock's secret? Poirot asked, his voice gentle but firm. Clarissa hesitated, her eyes clouding with doubt. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know who my father spoke to in the end, but I have a feeling, a horrible feeling, that it was someone close to us, someone inside the house. Poirot stood slowly, his thoughts now racing with possibilities. A secret, hidden within a clock, passed down through generations. A key that led to a vault of dangerous truths. And someone, perhaps within the very walls of Ashford Manor, had been willing to kill to keep those secrets buried. He turned to Clarissa, his expression soft but resolute. Mademoiselle Clarissa, the truth you have given me is both clear and shrouded in shadows. But rest assured, I will find the person who killed your father, and together we will uncover what lies within that vault. With those words, Poirot turned toward the door, the weight of the mystery pressing heavily upon him. The clock's final secret was closer than ever, and with it, the dark truth that had driven Sir Julian to his death. The storm outside raged on, but Poirot felt a sense of calm settle over him. For he knew, as always, that in the end, the truth would prevail. Chapter 7. The Shadow of Betrayal. The night was thick with rain, the windows of Ashford Manor streaked with water as the storm continued its relentless assault. Inside, however, the house was eerily quiet, save for the soft ticking of the remaining clocks. It was as though the manor itself held its breath, waiting for something to be revealed, something that would shatter the fragile silence. Hercule Poirot sat by the window in the drawing room, his eyes tracing the path of the storm outside, his thoughts as sharp and relentless as the winds that howled around the house. The pieces of Sir Julian Ashford's murder were slowly falling into place, but one crucial detail still eluded him: the identity of the person who had killed the clockmaker. In the previous days, Poirot had uncovered many secrets: Sir Julian's obsession with the clock, the cryptic messages, the hidden compartment containing the key, and Clarissa's admission of her father's discovery of a dangerous family secret. The truth had become murkier with every revelation, each twist in the case leading to deeper shadows. And now, the question that hung in the air like a storm cloud: was this: who in this house had been willing to kill to protect the secrets locked within the clock? It was time, Poirot decided, to confront the truth head-on. He turned from the window, his mind already made up. The shadows had been cast, but it was time to bring them into the light. He found himself once more in the drawing room, where Clarissa, Eleanor, and James had gathered. The atmosphere was thick with tension, each member of the family holding their breath as though afraid to speak the wrong word. Their eyes flickered nervously to Poirot as he entered, his presence both calming and unsettling. "I have learned much from all of you," Poirot began, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of the investigation. "The secrets of Sir Julian, the clock, the key, and the shadow of betrayal that looms over this house. But there is still one question that remains unanswered. Who among you killed Sir Julian Ashford?" At the sound of Poirot's words, the air in the room seemed to freeze. Eleanor's face paled, her eyes wide with shock. Clarissa looked down, her fingers trembling in her lap. James's posture stiffened, and his eyes darted nervously between the others, as though seeking refuge from Poirot's steady gaze. For a long moment, there was only silence, punctuated by the soft crackling of the fire. Poirot let the tension settle over the room, allowing each of them to absorb the full weight of his question. And then he spoke again, his voice soft, almost soothing. "I know that one of you killed Sir Julian," Poirot said, his eyes fixed on each of them in turn. "But more than that, I know that it was not just for the clock or its secrets. No, there was something more, a deeper motive, one rooted in betrayal." Eleanor flinched slightly at his words, and Clarissa's gaze shifted uneasily, but James remained motionless, his eyes narrowed, his hands clenched at his sides. Poirot's voice remained calm, but the intensity behind it grew. "You see, mes amis, this murder was not born from a simple desire for wealth or power. It was born from betrayal, a betrayal between family members, between people who should have trusted one another. And it is this betrayal that has led us to the truth." He paused, allowing the words to settle into the air before continuing. "Clarissa, you have already told me about your father's obsession with the clock and the dangerous secret he had uncovered. But there was more, was there not? You knew, even before he began speaking of the vault, that something was changing in your father. You knew that he had become obsessed with the idea of revealing these secrets, and you feared what might happen if he succeeded." Clarissa's eyes flickered with a mixture of guilt and fear, but she remained silent. Poirot's gaze softened, but his words were steady. "You feared, Mademoiselle Clarissa, that your father's obsession would destroy not only him, but everything you had worked for. You loved your father, yes, but you also wanted his wealth, his legacy. And when the clock's secret became the focus of his life, you saw a chance to seize it for yourself. But you were not the only one who saw the opportunity." He turned his gaze toward James, whose eyes now widened with recognition, as though Poirot's words had struck him like a blow. "Monsieur James," Poirot continued, "you too had a role to play in this story. You were an apprentice, a trusted servant to Sir Julian, and you too were part of the betrayal. But unlike Mademoiselle Clarissa, you were not driven by a desire for wealth or legacy. No, your betrayal was born of something far more personal, your feelings for Clarissa." James's eyes darted nervously toward Clarissa, but he said nothing. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he pressed on. "You were in love with her, Monsieur James, were you not?" Poirot asked, his voice gentle, as though he were coaxing the truth from a reluctant witness. You too had your own ambitions, your own desires. You thought, perhaps, that if Sir Julian's obsession with the clock continued, it would destroy him, and your chance at the woman you loved. James's face flushed, his lips trembling. "I never meant for things to get out of hand," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I just wanted her to see me, to see that I could offer her something more. But my master, he was in the way. He was so focused on the clock, so obsessed with unlocking its secrets. And when he began to speak of the vault, of the treasure, I saw my chance. Poirot nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on James. "You killed Sir Julian, Monsieur James, because you thought that by doing so, you would have a chance at the clock, at the wealth, and perhaps even at Clarissa's heart. But it was not just the clock you were after, was it? No, it was the power that the secret held, the power to change everything." James's head sank in shame, and for the first time, Poirot saw the true depth of his guilt. "And Mademoiselle Clarissa," Poirot said softly, "you were complicit, were you not? You knew what was happening, and you allowed it. You watched as your father's obsession grew, and you allowed James to believe that he could gain something from it. You betrayed your father as much as James did, for your own gain." Clarissa's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded slowly, her voice breaking as she whispered, "I never wanted him to die, but I didn't want to lose everything." Poirot turned toward Eleanor, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together as though she were struggling to contain her emotions. "And you, Madame Ashford," Poirot said softly, his voice now almost a whisper, "you knew everything. You knew about your daughter's and your apprentice's betrayal, and you allowed it to happen. You let them carry out their plans, knowing full well what they were capable of. Why? Was it because you feared losing your own power within this family?" Eleanor's expression faltered for a moment, and her gaze dropped to the floor. "I couldn't stop them," she whispered, her voice filled with regret. "I wanted to, but I was just as afraid as they were. We all were." Poirot stood in the center of the room, his gaze sweeping over the family, each one of them trapped in their own web of lies, deceit, and betrayal. They had all played their part in Sir Julian's death, each one of them contributing to the unraveling of the clockmaker's final obsession. And now, at last, the truth had been laid bare. Chapter 8. The Clockwork Mechanism. The storm had finally passed, leaving the manor in a heavy, oppressive silence. The air felt damp, but the dampness was not from the rain. It was from the weight of the mystery that still hung over Ashford Manor. Hercule Poirot sat in the drawing room, the ticking of the clocks now returning to their usual rhythm, almost as though the house itself was slowly regaining its composure after the upheaval. Yet Poirot knew that the calm was but a temporary reprieve. The truth, once uncovered, would ripple through this house with all the force of the storm that had just left. He had gathered the family again, Eleanor, Clarissa, and James, to confront the final pieces of the puzzle. Sir Julian's murder had been driven by more than just greed or power. It had been a result of a long-forgotten legacy, a legacy that had been hidden within the very mechanism of the clock that had consumed the clockmaker's thoughts in his final days. Poirot's mind continued to turn, his thoughts lingering on the key and the cryptic messages that had pointed toward the hidden vault. He knew that Sir Julian had been obsessed not just with the wealth the clock could bring, but with something deeper, a secret that had been buried for generations. The key, the vault, the dangerous legacy, it was all part of a mechanism far more intricate than the clocks Sir Julian had crafted. As Poirot entered the study, he found the family gathered in the same room where Sir Julian had been found dead. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation, and the lingering tension from the previous revelations filled the air. Clarissa, her face pale, sat near the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Eleanor stood by the desk, her posture rigid as though she were trying to hold on to her composure. James stood near the door, his expression a mixture of guilt and nervousness. Poirot looked at each of them with calm, calculating eyes before speaking, his voice smooth and deliberate, yet filled with the quiet certainty of someone who knew that the truth was within reach. "Mademoiselle Clarissa? Madame Ashford? Monsieur James?" Poirot began. "You have all played a part in the tragedy that unfolded within these walls. Your actions, your desires, and your betrayals have led us to this moment. And now, it is time to uncover the final mechanism of this clockwork puzzle." He paused, allowing his words to settle, then turned his gaze to Clarissa, who was staring out the window, her expression distant. "Clarissa," Poirot continued softly, "you have been at the heart of this mystery from the very beginning. You knew of your father's obsession, and you knew of the clock's secret. But there was more to your involvement than mere inheritance, was there not?" Clarissa's eyes shifted to meet his, and for the first time there was a flicker of something, regret perhaps, within them. She opened her mouth to speak but hesitated, her voice caught in her throat. "You were not simply motivated by the desire for wealth," Poirot said, his tone gentle but firm. "No, there was another force at work. You saw, like the rest of us, how Sir Julian's obsession with the clock grew. You were not only afraid of what the clock could reveal, but of what it would do to your family's reputation." Clarissa's shoulders sagged, and she looked away, her hands trembling. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But when I saw my father's obsession, I knew I had to act. I couldn't let him ruin everything we had worked for." Poirot nodded slowly. "You believed that the clock and its secret would destroy your family, but you were mistaken. It was the secrets that you, your mother, and Monsieur James kept from each other that destroyed your family." He turned toward James. "And you, Monsieur James, you were driven not only by love, but by your own ambitions. You believed that by eliminating Sir Julian, you would have a chance at the wealth he was so fixated on. But you underestimated something important, something that your father understood only too well." James looked up, his face pale and drawn. "I didn't mean to kill him," he whispered. "I just wanted to stop him from going any further. I thought if I could distract him, if I could make him stop working on the clock, everything would go back to normal." Poirot's gaze softened for a moment. "You too were a pawn in the mechanism of this mystery, Monsieur James. But you were not alone. You were driven by more than love, were you not? You sought something greater, something more elusive than Clarissa's heart." James shifted uncomfortably, but Poirot turned his attention back to Eleanor, who had remained silent throughout the conversation. "Madame Ashford," Poirot said, his voice now tinged with a quiet intensity, You too played a crucial role in this tragedy. You were not just the wife of Sir Julian, the mother of Clarissa. No, you were a keeper of secrets as well. The truth, as it often does, hides in the darkest corners, and it was you who sealed Sir Julian's fate. Eleanor flinched, her eyes narrowing slightly as she met Poirot's gaze. "What are you suggesting, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked, her voice low and guarded. "You knew of the clock's secret, Madame Ashford," Poirot said calmly. "But more than that, you knew that your husband's obsession was not just about wealth or power. Sir Julian had uncovered something far more dangerous, something that could destroy not only his reputation, but yours as well." Eleanor's lips trembled, and for a brief moment, Poirot saw the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. She stepped forward, her voice now quiet, almost apologetic. "I didn't want it to end like this," she murmured. "I knew what Sir Julian was planning. I knew that if he succeeded in unlocking the secrets of the clock, everything would be exposed. But I couldn't stop him. I couldn't bear to watch him destroy himself and everything we had built." Poirot's expression softened, though his eyes were sharp with understanding. "You, Madame Ashford, chose to preserve your family's legacy at any cost. But in doing so, you were complicit in the destruction of your own family. Your silence, your willingness to let the clock's secret remain hidden, contributed to your husband's death." There was a long, heavy pause as the family absorbed the truth of Poirot's words. The room seemed to hold its breath, as though the very walls were waiting for the final revelation. Poirot continued, his voice steady but resolute. "The clock was never just a timepiece. It was a mechanism, a trap that had been set long before Sir Julian ever laid hands on it. It contained not just the family's wealth, but the secrets of a past long buried. A secret that was more dangerous than any of you could have imagined. And in the end, it was this very mechanism, the clockwork of your family's lies, that led to Sir Julian's death." Poirot reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the key that he had found earlier. He held it up, the small, tarnished metal glinting in the candlelight. "This key, mes amis, was not just the key to the vault. It was the key to everything. It unlocked the truth that you are all so desperate to hide." The family was silent, each of them now fully aware of the depths of their involvement in the tragedy. Poirot's gaze swept over them one last time before he spoke again. "I will make sure that Sir Julian's secrets are revealed, and with them, the truth will finally be set free." The room was still, the only sound the quiet ticking of the clocks, now undisturbed by the storm. But in that moment, Poirot knew that the mystery had been solved. The clockwork mechanism had been unraveled, and the shadow of betrayal had finally been lifted. Chapter 9. The Final Hour. The morning after the storm had passed, the world outside Ashford Manor seemed to have taken a deep, steady breath. The skies had cleared, revealing a soft, muted light that filtered through the large windows of the drawing room. The rain had stopped, leaving the grounds damp and serene, as if nature itself had cleansed the estate from the tumultuous events of the past few days. But within the walls of Ashford Manor, the tension remained thick in the air. Hercule Poirot stood by the fireplace, his back straight, his mind running through the final pieces of the puzzle. The mystery of Sir Julian Ashford's death had been complicated, yes, but it had also been revealing. The truth was now close, so close that it almost felt inevitable. And yet Poirot knew there was still a final step to take, a final piece of the story to bring to light. The family was gathered in the same room where they had all been questioned before, but this time there was a difference. The truth was no longer hidden in the shadows. The answers were in front of them, and all that remained was for Poirot to connect the final dots. Eleanor, Clarissa, and James sat quietly, each of them knowing that this was the moment they had all been dreading. Their faces were pale, their expressions tense, but there was an unmistakable sense of resignation in the room. They knew that the truth was coming, and that there would be no more secrets left to hide. Poirot turned to face them, his eyes calm but sharp, the quiet authority in his voice unmistakable. "You have all played your parts in this tragedy," Poirot began softly, "but it is time to lay the final piece of this mystery bare. Sir Julian's death was not a simple accident, nor was it driven solely by the clock or its secrets. No, there was something deeper, something more personal, and it is this truth that must now be revealed." He paused, allowing his words to settle, and then continued, his voice steady, but with an undeniable gravity. The clock, as we know, was not simply a timepiece. It was a mechanism, an intricate design that Sir Julian believed held the key to unlocking something much more valuable than money or power. But in the end, it was not the clock itself that led to his death. It was the mechanism of betrayal, the lies you each wove, and the secrets you each kept. Poirot's gaze shifted from Eleanor to Clarissa to James, each of them marked by guilt, by fear, by the knowledge that their roles in this tragedy were now laid bare. "Madame Ashford," Poirot began, turning to Eleanor, "you were the first to see the danger. You knew of your husband's obsession with the clock, and you feared what it would mean for your family. But instead of confronting him, you chose to silence the truth. You allowed Sir Julian to continue his work, knowing that it would lead to nothing but destruction." Eleanor's face tightened, but she said nothing, her eyes lowering in shame. She knew that Poirot was right. She had allowed her own fears to drive her actions, keeping the truth hidden for as long as she could. But it was no longer possible to hide. "And Mademoiselle Clarissa," Poirot continued, his gaze now fixed on the young woman, "you were the one who saw the opportunity in your father's obsession. You feared losing everything, his wealth, his legacy, and so you let the clock become the tool of your ambition. You knew of your father's discovery, and you saw how it could change everything. But in your desperation to protect your own future, you allowed the darkness to consume you as well." Clarissa's lips trembled, and for a moment, she seemed as though she might break down entirely. Her eyes were filled with regret, her shoulders slumped, as though the weight of her actions had finally taken its toll. But still, she said nothing. Poirot's eyes then shifted to James. The young man had remained silent, his posture stiff, but his hands clenched in his lap, betraying his unease. "Monsieur James," Poirot said, his voice quieter now, "you were not just a pawn in this game, as you might have believed. You too played a role. Your love for Clarissa, your own ambitions, led you down a path that you could not turn back from. You believed that by removing Sir Julian, you could claim the wealth and the love you desired. But it was your fear of losing Clarissa, of being cast aside, that drove you to murder." James's eyes widened as Poirot's words hit their mark. His face paled, and his shoulders tensed as though preparing for the full weight of his actions to come crashing down upon him. But still, he remained silent. Poirot stepped forward, his gaze steady and unflinching. "It was you, Monsieur James, who found Sir Julian that night. It was you who saw him dead, but it was also you who took the opportunity to hide the clock. You knew that if Sir Julian's discovery came to light, it would destroy everything you had hoped for. And so, you took the clock, hoping to bury its secrets for good." Poirot's voice softened, his eyes now focused on all three of them. But the clock was never the true secret. The true secret was the betrayal between you all. You used your father, Clarissa, and James. You allowed fear and ambition to drive you. And in the end, it was this betrayal that led to Sir Julian's death. The room was still, the only sound the quiet ticking of the clocks in the background. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of Poirot's words hung in the air, each one of them now fully aware of the truth that had been revealed. Eleanor, Clarissa, and James were silent, their guilt now fully exposed. The storm outside had passed, but the storm within Ashford Manor had only just begun. Poirot took a deep breath, his voice quiet but filled with finality. "Sir Julian's death was a tragedy, yes, but it was also a consequence of the choices you made. The clock, the secret it held, was merely a symbol, a mechanism for the betrayal that ran deeper than any clockwork design." As Poirot stood there, his eyes never leaving the family, the truth seemed to settle into the room like the calm after the storm. There would be no more lies, no more secrets to hide. The clockwork of Sir Julian's life, his death, and the family's betrayal had been revealed in its entirety. The only thing left now was to face the consequences. The final hour had come. Chapter 10, A Return to Peace. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting soft golden rays over the grounds of Ashford Manor. The storm that had raged for days had finally passed, leaving behind only the echoes of its fury, now softened by the calm that had settled over the estate. The trees in the garden swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves glistening with the remnants of rain. The world outside had regained its peace, and yet within the walls of the manor, the tension that had lingered for so long was now being replaced with a profound stillness. Hercule Poirot sat in the drawing room, his back straight and his hands folded gently in his lap, his mind finally at ease. The mystery of Sir Julian Ashford's death had been unraveled, the secrets of the clock revealed, and the intricate web of betrayal, lies, and ambition laid bare. The family, once consumed by fear and guilt, had now been forced to confront the consequences of their actions. And though the truth had come at a great cost, it was undeniable that it had brought a sense of closure to the shadows that had haunted Ashford Manor for so long. The family had gathered one last time, but this time, the atmosphere in the room was different. There was no longer the palpable tension of secrets waiting to be uncovered, no longer the weight of unresolved guilt hanging in the air. Instead, there was a quiet resignation, a solemn understanding that the truth had been revealed, and that the path forward would require them to reckon with the consequences. Eleanor, Clarissa, and James sat across from Poirot, each of them still grappling with the weight of what had happened. Eleanor, the matriarch of the family, her face drawn with age and sorrow, now seemed more fragile than ever. Clarissa, once so distant and cold, had softened, her eyes tired, but more honest than they had been before. And James, who had been so filled with tension and guilt, now sat with his head slightly lowered, his face pale, but free from the frantic fear that had once clouded his features. Poirot, ever the calm and composed figure, studied them with his usual intensity, but there was a softness in his eyes now, a compassion that had been hard to see in the midst of the investigation. He had seen them all for what they were, flawed individuals driven by their own desires and fears, but also capable of change, of redemption, if only they chose to face the truth. "I have uncovered the truth, mes amis," Poirot began, his voice gentle yet firm. "And I have seen how each of you, in your own way, contributed to the tragedy of your husband's and father's death. The clock, the key, the vault, these were not the true causes of his demise. No, the true cause was the betrayal that lay hidden within your hearts. But now, the truth is out, and it is time for you to face the consequences of your actions." He paused for a moment, allowing his words to settle in the stillness of the room. The family listened, each of them absorbing the gravity of the truth. But it was clear that while the revelations had been painful, they had also opened the door to a new beginning. "Madame Ashford," Poirot said, turning his gaze toward Eleanor, "you have lived with the burden of your husband's obsession, the weight of secrets that you were too afraid to confront. But now, you are free of that weight. You are free to live without fear of what might have been, and you are free to make peace with the choices you made." Eleanor's eyes, though still filled with sorrow, softened as she looked at Poirot. "I never wanted any of this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted my family to fall apart. But I was afraid. I was afraid of losing everything, of losing my legacy. I see now that my silence only made things worse." Poirot nodded, his eyes full of understanding. "It is never easy to face the truth, Madame Ashford, but it is only in the light of truth that we can find peace." He turned then to Clarissa, who sat with her hands folded in her lap, her eyes downcast. "Mademoiselle Clarissa," Poirot continued softly, "you too have been consumed by fear? Fear of losing your father's wealth? Fear of losing your place in this world? But you have faced that fear, and now you must learn to live without it. You have the chance to rebuild, to find a way to live that is not driven by ambition or greed, but by honesty and integrity." Clarissa looked up at Poirot, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and relief. "I thought that if I could just hold on to the wealth, if I could just keep the family legacy intact, everything would be okay. But now I see that I was wrong. I thought I was protecting us, but in the end, I was only destroying us." Poirot gave her a reassuring smile, the warmth in his gaze a reflection of the compassion he had shown throughout the investigation. "You have learned a valuable lesson, Mademoiselle Clarissa. It is never too late to change, to make amends, and that is the first step toward peace." Finally, Poirot turned to James, who had remained silent, his eyes cast downward. "Monsieur James," Poirot said gently, "your actions were driven by love, yes, but also by fear. Fear of being cast aside, fear of losing everything you had hoped for. But you, too, must come to terms with the consequences of your choices. It is not too late for you to rebuild your life, to live without the weight of guilt." James lifted his head, his eyes filled with both regret and a glimmer of hope. "I thought that, eliminating Sir Julian, I could have everything. I thought that by taking control, I could make things right. But I see now that I was wrong. I destroyed everything I cared about." Poirot's voice softened as he spoke, his words full of quiet wisdom. "Monsieur James, it is never easy to face the mistakes of the past, but it is only by doing so that we can begin to heal. You have a chance to change, to rebuild, and to find peace within yourself." The room fell into a deep silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts, reflecting on the weight of Poirot's words. The tension that had once filled the space now seemed to dissipate, replaced by a quiet understanding, a gentle acceptance of the truth. Poirot stood, his movements calm and measured, and with one last look at the family, he spoke the final words that would close the chapter of their shared tragedy. "You have faced the truth, mes amis," he said, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. "And now, you must find your way to peace. The past is behind you, but the future lies before you. Make it a future built on honesty, on trust, and on love." With those words, Poirot turned and walked toward the door. As he passed through it and stepped into the hallway, he allowed himself a final glance back at the family. They were no longer the same as they had been when he first arrived. The shadows of their past had been lifted, and with that, a sense of peace had finally begun to settle over Ashford Manor. As Poirot left the house and walked into the fresh morning air, the sun now fully risen and the sky clear, he felt the weight of the case lift from his shoulders. The mystery had been solved, the truth revealed, and the family now had the chance to rebuild their lives, to start anew. The clocks in Ashford Manor ticked softly in the distance, their steady rhythm a reminder that time, like life, marches on. And in the quiet peace that followed, Poirot felt a small sense of contentment. His work here was done, and he had brought about the calm after the storm.